Certainly. Here's section 1 of the story. They thought we'd bow, we made them kneel, written with a minimum of 700 words. Hashtag section 1, the chains they forged. The sky above Sector 17 was always gray, clouded with ash, industrial exhaust, and the oppressive presence of Zarqari patrol ships. No birds flew here. No laughter echoed. The only sounds were the mechanical hum of conveyor belts, the bark of enforcers, and the distant clatter of broken souls dragging their chains through another day. Cale Rourke's hands were blistered, knuckles cracked open by frost and metal alike. He'd spent the last 3 years tightening bolts on atmospheric processors he didn't understand and dragging carts heavier than most vehicles he used to drive. Once, he had been a soldier, Special Operations, Earth Defense Coalition. That was before the fall. Before the Zarqari came like storms in the night sky and turned cities into smoldering ruins. He kept his head down as he worked, like every other inmate. Sector 17 was a forced labor camp, one of hundreds dotting the decimated surface of Earth. The Zarqari believed in domination through structure, mechanical, emotionless, and thorough. They didn't enslave humanity out of hatred. They simply believed humans were inefficient, unpredictable, too wild to rule themselves. So they ruled us. 20 years ago, Earth's defenses collapsed in mere months. Their orbital weaponry silenced our skies. Their foot soldiers, 7-foot obsidian-skinned titans with fusion spears, marched across continents, crushing armies like ants. And when humanity surrendered, thinking submission might preserve life, the Zarqari smiled and tightened the leash. Culture was the first thing they eradicated. National identities, languages, even music, all outlawed under the Dominion's one silence policy. Schools were turned into indoctrination centers. Books were burned. Statues were torn down. All that mattered was production, obedience, order. But something ancient stirred beneath that silence, something the Zarqari misunderstood. Humanity did not need freedom to resist. It only needed memory. Cale remembered the day he was captured. He'd been leading a rogue cell in Colorado, sabotaging power grids and feeding civilians. He was betrayed by someone desperate to save their family. Cale didn't blame them. Everyone broke eventually, or so he thought. But Sector 17 taught him something different. It wasn't that people never broke. It was that some broke and stood up again. The first time he heard the phrase, it was whispered during a routine march to the mines. Steel bends, but never breaks. He thought it was nonsense, false hope whispered by the dying. But over time, he noticed patterns. Certain prisoners traded tools that shouldn't exist. Some formed repair crews that seemed too well coordinated. There were too many coincidences, too many accidental malfunctions. One evening, after lights-out curfew, a knock came to the ventilation hatch beneath Cale's bunk. A girl's voice, calm but urgent, "Rourke. We've seen you. Get in." He slid through the vent without a word. The tunnels beneath the camp were older than the Zarqari construction. Sewage lines from before the war, long thought collapsed. But here they were, rebuilt, reinforced and alive with whispers. The Ember Circle, they called themselves. Not a name chosen lightly. A fire needs oxygen, kindling, time. They weren't a resistance yet, but they would be. Saria stood in the center, surrounded by crude maps and stolen Zarqari tech. Her eyes were fire and frost, unafraid, calculating. A former communications officer before the invasion, she had built the Ember Circle from prisoners, smugglers and forgotten survivors. "We're not planning an escape," she told Cale that night. "We're planning a beginning." He laughed. "You're outnumbered, outgunned, outmatched." "And so were the Spartans at Thermopylae," she replied. "But history remembers them because they stood." In the weeks that followed, Cale trained prisoners in secret, drills disguised as work routines, coded signals passed as coughs and sneezes. He started to believe again, not in victory, but in defiance. Every forged shiv, every lifted circuit, every secretly rewired comms tower was a middle finger raised to the sky. They couldn't outfight the Zarqari. But maybe they could outlast them. Outthink them. Cale watched one boy, Yuri, no older than 10, help smuggle a power cell hidden inside a hollowed-out lunch crate. Yuri had never seen a tree, never tasted chocolate. But he knew the difference between living on your knees and dying on your feet. That was enough. One night, Saria revealed their real weapon, a Zarqari power core, small, unstable but potent. Stolen months ago during a failed supply raid. It was a miracle it hadn't exploded already. "We'll use it when the High Marshal visits the camp next cycle," she said. "They'll gather for inspection. Cameras rolling. If we ignite then, they won't be able to bury it." Cale stared at the glowing orb. The Zarkari thought humans were beaten. That we'd bowed broken. That all it took to tame a species was force. They didn't understand the truth. You can shatter a sword, but if you leave the pieces long enough in the fire, they forge themselves into something new. Would you like me to continue with Section 2, Lighting the Fire, next? Absolutely. Here's Section 2 of They Thought We'd Bow, We Made Them Kneel, written with a minimum of 700 words. Hashtag Section 2, Lighting the Fire. The snow had started to fall again, soft as ash. From a distance, Sector 17 might have looked like a peaceful factory complex nestled in a gray valley. But up close, it was a graveyard: cold steel, electrified fences, guard towers shaped like claws, and the ever-present hum of Zarkari drones circling above like vultures. Kale stood with his back to the wall in the maintenance corridor, watching Yuri crawl through a duct with a bundle of copper wiring in his teeth. The boy gave a sharp nod before vanishing into the shadows. Every day, the Ember Circle inched closer to the ignition point, slow, silent, and surgical. The Zarkari never saw the danger coming. That was their first mistake. The High Marshal's visit was 10 days away. The Dominion's most decorated commander, Vrax Talzir, was scheduled to inspect the facility as part of a morale-boosting campaign for Dominion media. To them, Sector 17 was a poster child of compliance. Efficiency. Order. What better place to parade before their empire? Kale and Saria planned to turn that performance into a funeral. The stolen Zarkari power core, the Emberheart, as they now called it, was being housed in a repurposed vent chamber under the machine foundry. Saria had stabilized it using salvaged coils from drone wreckage and surrounded it with an EMP cage. It was crude, dangerous, and beautiful. If we rig it to detonate beneath the tower's main power relay, Saria said one night, tapping her map, we can black out the facility, take out their signal repeaters, and trap every enforcer inside the camp walls. Then we strike. Kale looked over the schematic. How many will die? She didn't flinch. Enough to make them listen. He nodded. It wasn't about bloodlust. It was about message. Humanity had been silent for too long. They needed the galaxy to hear them scream. Over the next several days, the Ember Circle sprang into furious motion. Prisoners not even part of the inner group were folded in, tested through acts of courage, small missions to prove loyalty. They lifted scraps, diverted attention, sabotaged cooling units to force guard rotations. Everything had purpose. Kale trained fighters by night, small units that could move like phantoms through the corridors. Combat was out of the question in a straight fight. But ambushes, hit-and-run tactics, choke points? That was their domain. I fought in cities once, Kale told them during one midnight briefing, but this camp is tighter, crueler. You're not soldiers. You're sparks. Just get close enough to the fuel, and the whole place will light up. Meanwhile, Saria built a jamming device using parts from gutted translator units. With the right signal, they could disrupt the drone uplinks and stop the Dominion from calling in air support, at least for the first few minutes. It wouldn't last, but it didn't need to. This wasn't an occupation. It was an explosion. Then came the betrayal. It happened on day 9. During a routine supply drop, a Zarkari security sweep uncovered Yuri's stash of tools. He was interrogated, but Kale knew the boy wouldn't talk. The real problem came an hour later, when the camp loudspeakers blared with the chilling metallic voice of Warden Skur. He was flanked by 10 guards, and behind him stood Clemens, a prisoner Kale once trusted, face pale, eyes hollow. Resistance will be met with finality, Skur said. 50 of your comrades have confessed. They will be made examples. One by one, prisoners were dragged to the gallows pole, a structure unused for years, now hurriedly assembled in the center yard. The execution was methodical, mechanical. No passion. Just order. Kale watched from the shadows, hands clenched in helpless fury. Saria grabbed his arm, holding him back. Not yet, she whispered. Not like this. But the rage grew. That night, in the blood-soaked silence that followed the executions, the Ember Circle gathered in the forge chamber. Faces grim, fists clenched. They had lost friends. Family. Pieces of themselves. But they had not lost their mission. Kale stepped forward. They think this broke us. No one spoke. They think that by killing 50 of us, they've bought our obedience. But the truth is, they've made a mistake. He walked to the edge of the Ember Heart chamber and placed his hand on the cage, feeling the energy hum beneath. They showed the galaxy their cruelty. Now we show them our defiance. The vote was unanimous. The plan would go ahead, despite the risk, despite the losses. The morning of the High Marshal's arrived wrapped in sterile ceremony. Zarkari banners were hung. Enforcers marched in precision lines. Surveillance drones buzzed in synchronized formations. Prisoners were ordered into formation, filthy but presentable. Kale stood among them, his wrists shackled, hiding the blade pressed against his palm. He looked to his left and caught Saria's eye. She gave the faintest nod. The trap was set. The ember heart ticked below their feet. This was no longer about escape. It was about telling the universe. We bent. You broke us. But today we burn, and we take you with us. Asterisk asterisk. Would you like me to move on to Section 3, Echoes of Defiance next? Of course. Here is Section 3 of They Thought We'd Bow, We Made Them Kneel, written with a minimum of 700 words. Hashtag Section 3, Echoes of Defiance. The explosion that tore through Sector 17 wasn't just a detonation of metal and fire, it was a signal. A declaration. For the first time in over 2 decades, a human uprising had succeeded in open defiance of the Zarkari Dominion. The Ember Heart ignited more than just the command tower. It sparked a movement that could no longer be smothered. Within minutes of the blast, the central grid of the camp was down. Security drones fell from the sky like dead crows. Power walls flickered, then died. Gates once guarded by 10-foot mechs now stood wide open. Kale Rourke and the Ember Circle led the charge through the chaos, routing the remaining enforcers with sheer audacity and salvaged weapons. The Zarkari tried to counterattack. Reinforcements were scrambled, but their comms were jammed. By the time air support arrived, Sector 17 was already lost. Saria stood atop the crumbled husk of the old command center and broadcast a message using the hacked Dominion relay. Her voice was calm, low, but carried like thunder. We are the ashes you left behind. We are the flame you feared would return. You thought we would bow, but we made you kneel. The transmission spread faster than anyone imagined. Across the globe, from mining colonies in Australia to drowned cities in Europe, survivors picked up the signal. Even off-world human labor ships caught wind of the uprising. It didn't matter that most had no weapons, no plans. What they had now was hope. And hope is a dangerous thing. Other camps began to follow suit. First in small pockets, tool riots, work strikes, hidden broadcasts. Then the wave grew. Entire outposts went dark. Zarkari towers crumbled overnight. Weapons were stolen. Garrisons ambushed. The Ember Circle's flame had become a wildfire. But fire consumes everything, even its carriers. Kale and his fighters didn't rest. With Sector 17 now in human control, they used it as a forward base. The forge was reforged, literally, into an armory. Workshops churned out ammunition, armor, and drones repurposed with makeshift AI modules. Blacksmiths, engineers, and scavengers worked side by side, forming the first human militia in years. Kale's name spread like a ghost story among the Dominion. The Flameborn, they called him. A soldier who died in the ashes but rose again with vengeance in his lungs. The Zarkari media tried to discredit him, labeling him a rogue terrorist, a failed clone experiment, even a myth invented by dissidents. But the more they tried to erase him, the more he became legend. Still, the war wasn't clean. Victory had a cost. In one mission to liberate Sector 9, Saria's squad was ambushed. Half were lost in a corridor collapse set off by a trap. When Kale found her 3 days later, she had killed a Zarkari officer with her bare hands but suffered burns from plasma fire. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just asked, "Did we win?" Kale didn't have the heart to say what they'd lost. But they pressed on. One by one, rebel groups merged under a single banner, * the Cinderguard Star. Kale never asked to lead, but his voice carried weight. Not because he promised victory, but because he spoke plainly, they were already living in death. Fighting gave them a reason to keep breathing. We are not soldiers, he told them at the first gathering of the Cinderguard. We are survivors who chose to stop surviving. More alliances followed. Alien species under the Zarkari's heel, like the Thalari, a peaceful race of scholars enslaved for generations, heard of the human revolt. One Thalari ambassador, Rivix, defected and brought data on Zarkari military routes and weak points. Your rage, Rivix said to Kale, reminds us we once had voices too. This terrified the Dominion more than any weapon. Human resistance alone was troublesome. But a multi-species rebellion? That was something they hadn't prepared for. The Zarkari tightened their grip in response. Cities still under their control became bloodbaths. Executions were televised. Entire populations were sterilized under the pretense of compliance correction. They thought it would break the humans again. But every atrocity only strengthened the resolve. Yuri, The boy who once smuggled wires through air vents now operated a sniper team from a ruined skyscraper in the Northern Territories. He wore the same boots Kale had given him, now patched and worn but still intact. When he took out a Zarkari general from half a mile away, he left a note behind.
You taught us pain.
We returned it as precision. Kale and Saria knew the rebellion couldn't stay underground forever. They needed a bigger move, a strike that would shake the Dominion at its core. Their eyes turned skyward, the orbital station Carthian's Watch, a Zarkari military relay that coordinated troop movements across Earth. Taking it would be suicide.
But so was bowing.
To be continued in Section 4, When Giants Kneel. Would you like me to continue with the final Section 4 now? Absolutely. Here's Section 4 of They Thought We'd Bow, We Made Them Kneel, with a minimum of 700 words. Hashtag Section 4, When Giants Kneel. Carthian's Watch hung in the sky like a god's eye, immense, invincible, always watching. The Zarkari orbital relay was more than a military outpost.
It was a symbol.
Every command, every strike, every atrocity passed through it before touching the surface below. To destroy it would be to blind the beast. To take it would be to choke it. Kale Rourke stood aboard the rusted command bridge of the Ashwake, a retrofitted Zarkari cargo vessel with stolen engines and patched hulls. Around him were the most unlikely crew the stars had ever known, former prisoners, rebel techs, even Thalari navigators. In the distance, Earth shimmered, scarred and still, but no longer silent. You're sure this will work? Saria asked, her body braced against the control panel, face still marked by the burn across her jaw.
No, Kale replied.
But we're out of time. The plan was madness. Using the stolen coordinates provided by Rivix, they would approach Carthian's Watch under a Dominion transponder signal, bluffing their way past the outer defenses. Then, with a small strike team, they'd infiltrate the station's control deck, seize the uplink tower, and broadcast a message to the entire Dominion-controlled sector, before sabotaging the core systems from within. Even if they succeeded, they likely wouldn't survive. Kale didn't care. Survival was never the point. The Ashwake punched through the atmosphere, engines roaring like ancient war drums. As the orbital defense systems scanned them, Kale held his breath. The false ID codes flickered through, bouncing between Dominion satellites.
Alarms lit up, for a moment. Then, silence. They were in.
Inside Carthian's Watch, everything was pristine.
Cold.
Beautiful in a sterile, suffocating way. White corridors, humming lights, not a speck of dust. Zarkari moved with military grace, unaware that human boots had touched the halls. Kale's team struck like thunder. Silenced rifles.
EMP bursts.
Enforcers fell in seconds. Kale led the charge, Saria beside him, her plasma pistol hissing through enemy armor. They fought not like soldiers, but like storms.
Unrelenting. Furious.
They reached the main relay chamber within 17 minutes. Just as expected, the system's core was already interfacing with Dominion Command.
Perfect timing.
Kale activated the manual override.
The screen blinked. Then lit up.
He stood before the feed, the cameras broadcasting his face across thousands of Zarkari monitors throughout the sector. This is Kale Rourke of Earth, he said, voice steady despite the chaos behind him. To the Zarkari Dominion, you believed you could erase us. You believed that silence meant surrender. But we were never quiet, we were waiting. Behind him, Saria linked the station's feed to the rebel network. The signal bounced from Earth's surface to deep space listening posts and civilian relay stations on other worlds. Species the Zarkari had conquered long ago now saw a human, scarred, defiant, standing in their master's most sacred stronghold. We are the ones you tried to chain. We are the flame that survived your flood. And now, we bring fire to your door. As the last words echoed, Rivix triggered the sabotage sequence from a nearby console. The power grid stuttered, lights flickered, and the gravity wells destabilized.
The station began to tremble.
Zarkari reinforcements poured in, too late. The human strike team held them off as long as they could. Kale ordered his people to retreat, but he stayed behind, covering their escape. Saria refused to leave. We started this together, she said, sliding beside him behind a broken console. We finish it together. Kale gave a small smile. You were always better at dying with style. They fought to the last minute. But before the station tore itself apart, Kale hit one final command, launching escape pods filled with data, blueprints, names, secrets of the Dominion that could shatter their rule. The Ashwake and the others made it out. Carthian's Watch exploded in orbit, 1,000 streaks of burning light raining down through Earth's skies like falling stars. Cities looked up.
People watched.
And for the first time in generations, they didn't feel fear.
They felt power.
Epilogue, Kneeling Giants. 3 years later, the Zarkari Dominion collapsed. Without the orbital network, without their image of invincibility, rebellions exploded across their empire. The Thalari rose. The Gorn defected. Even some Zarkari commanders abandoned their posts, realizing the lie of their empire's perfection. Earth was not just free, it became a symbol. A place where the weak stood tall, where the broken became blades. The phrase Sector 17 was no longer a number. It was a warning to tyrants. Saria now stood as Earth's first ambassador to the newly formed Interworld Coalition. She wore no crown, no medals. Just a pendant, a sliver of scorched alloy from the station that had taken Kale's life. On the anniversary of the uprising, she returned to the ruins of Sector 17.
Where it all began.
There, in the middle of a monument garden, stood a statue of Kale, not in armor, not with weapons, but standing tall, one hand raised, as if calling others forward. At the base, an inscription. They thought we'd bow. We made them kneel. And above the world now free, a new flag flew, stitched from fragments of prison uniforms and burnt banners, a flame on a black field, rising against the void. Because some chains aren't broken. They're melted into swords. Would you like this compiled as a full 2,800+ word document or formatted for video, audio, or ebook use?